Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Create an Edible Garden. That's going to be presented by Master Gardeners of Orange County. We are going to be starting. Before we do get started, a little bit of housekeeping items where we like to discuss. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Create an Edible Garden workshop. I hope you are all super excited to be here because we are super excited to have you join us. My name is Juan Garcia. I am the Senior Landscape Water Efficiency Specialist with the IRWD and part of our great water efficiency team. Before we get started, I would like to share a few housekeeping items with you to remember throughout the event. You will notice that your microphones are already muted. This helps to allow our video presentation to run smoothly and to avoid any distractions. During this workshop, you will have the opportunity to win one of our awesome water efficiency kits. There will be 3 questions within the presentation, so please make sure to listen carefully to our presenter, Shelly, and we will provide you with instructions on how to send your answers, and every correct answer will then be entered into our random drawing for one of these lovely conservation kits. Also, we will be sending you an email which will include a PDF copy of the presentation slides, a list of our water efficiency kit prize winners, and other valuable information. We do have quite a bit of handouts to send to everybody. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so definitely stick around for that. We have a master gardener managing the chat feature, so please submit your questions through the chat function. The best way to do this is to click the drop-down arrow in the chat area of your screen, choose everyone, then submit your questions. By doing this, it helps our team to ensure your questions are collected and answered properly. Should you have any technical issues during the workshop, please contact our help desk line at 949-453-5656. An IRWD representative will be available to assist you. So let's all test the chat feature by having everyone type in what community or city you are joining us from. And remember to choose the everyone option when posting your comments. So let's all get on the chat feature and let's see where everybody's from. Great. Amazing. Great. Oh, I see some people from far away. Fantastic. University Park. A lot of Irvine, a lot of communities. Close to Mesa, Newport, Irvine, University Park. Got it. I saw Chino Hills come by, Lake Forest, San Juan, Irvine. Fantastic. Well, excellent. It looks like everybody's getting acquainted with the chat feature. So just remember, any question you might have, just go ahead and type it into that chat feature. We'll make sure to address it as best as possible. Well, with that said, Shelly, let's take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shelly Trainer, and I am your speaker today. I am a master gardener from Orange County, and I do grow edibles, particularly in small spaces, because where I live, I only have small spaces. But I've been experimenting with all kinds of things, so hopefully can address some of the issues that you may have either encountered already or will encounter if you're just getting started. Juan mentioned that there's another master gardener. Her name is Elise Roberts, and she is going to be monitoring our chat for us. And so if you submit a question in the chat, if Elise is able to, and she most likely will be able to answer your question at that time, she will do so. And any questions that we don't get answered during that time, we can also try to answer at the end. So do post your questions in chat, but you might just get them answered at that time. So I am, as a master gardener, part of the University of California Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And this is the group that provides master gardeners with all of the information that we're using to help educate the public. That's the science behind what we're doing. And as master gardeners, we want you to be successful in your home gardening, whether that be horticulture or just pleasure kind of thing. But we want you to do it in a way that's good for you, but also good for our environment. So our whole goal as master gardeners is we're people who wanted to learn about about horticulture, but we really want to spread our knowledge back to the people that live in our county. With that, today's topic is create an edible garden. That is part of my garden right there. So we're going to talk about the fact that you don't have to have a large space in order to grow edibles. Again, this focus of today is edibles specifically, although you'll hear some references to non-edibles at times. As you can see, you can have a lot of space or you can have a small space, and you can still get a variety of things you can grow and a good amount of production. However, this becomes really critical. If you're going to grow an edible garden, you have to be concerned about the location in your environment, whether that be a yard, a balcony, a patio, whatever. Remember, and maybe this won't even be something you remember, maybe you didn't realize this, but the things that we typically grow to eat are not native to Southern California, meaning without the kind of amendments and things we're going to be doing, and I'm going to be talking about, you're not going to get the production that you want. These plants don't natively grow here. So the location is critical. What about that location? The very first thing that's important, sun. And sun is what you really need more than anything for edibles. There are other plants you can grow that one thrive in shade or lack of sun, but the edibles, if you want to get enough to eat, you need full sun. What does full sun mean? Usually 6 hours a day. I've heard less. If your edibles don't get enough sun, a couple of things will happen. They won't grow very well. Some may die depending on how little sun that is, but they might not have enough energy in order to produce the kind of thing that you want to grow. So particularly when you're trying to grow what I call seed containers, be that a squash, a cucumber, a tomato, a piece of fruit, those are all part of the reproductive system. If they don't have enough energy, and that word down there in the bottom left is photosynthesis, that is why they need sun. They need sun in order to conduct the process internally to create the nutrients that they need in order to grow, and basically sugars, carbohydrates. So sun is important. And I've got a little compass there because you have to remember that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. If you'll notice on large pieces of property, they actually orient their plants so that no one plant blocks the other. So they'll often put them in a north-south row so that they get the sun in the morning, at noon, and at the end of the day. That's very specific because the tall plants will shade. And do remember that shade changes in the time of the year. The angle of the sun is different. And if you happen to be in an urban environment, like a lot of us are, you get things like deciduous trees that have leaves in the summer and not in the winter, and that changes your shade pattern. There are fences, buildings, other structures, umbrellas. People have an umbrella up all day long. You might end up with things with shade. So unless you want the shade, do remember that this is really important. Irrigation and water. So after sun, water, without the sun, you're not going to get the production you want. Without the water, you're going to have dead plants. And you'll notice in the upper right corner of some of my slides, I have large and small. So this slide talks about watering or an irrigation, particularly when you have a large amount of area that you're trying to grow in. So you really want to water deep and slow. You don't want to water very often, but you want to water consistently. It's so important that the plants don't go through a cycle of getting really dry, then really wet, then really dry, which is why we're looking at watering deeply and slowly. And really the only way to know that is to either feel the soil with your finger or use a water meter. Things you can do to improve your irrigation capabilities for a large is to use drip irrigation. There's a picture of that down below. What you don't see in the picture on the right, mulch. So mulch is a really important thing, particularly in large scale areas. Mulch does a variety of things. From when you're talking irrigation, what it does is it prevents evaporation, or reduces, doesn't prevent it, but it reduces the evaporation, also keeps the soil from getting too hard, keeps the soil temperature lower, keeps the weeds away. So mulch is really important to put on top of your soil. So it would go on top here. And so if in this picture here, there may be drip irrigation, but you wouldn't see it because it's covered by the mulch. Now, if you've got a small area, and we're going to be talking a lot about differences and options you've got, but you're going to definitely want to be checking the moisture in small spaces, because small things tend to dry out a whole lot faster than a large area. And you definitely don't want the soil to dry out down below about an inch. So you're going to want to be measuring that again, with your finger or a moisture meter. Some of the best thing you can do is put your irrigation on a timer, whether that be a manual timer, maybe a battery powered one, or you have a full-fledged electric timer system that you've got. But you want to be consistent, because containers tend to dry out quickly, particularly if they're small, or if they're in a material that allows them to get hot, such as a metal container. Mulch, I put the question mark there. In a wine barrel such as that, you might want to put some mulch because you have a large space, but in a small pot, there's often not a lot of room. But if you plant densely, having the plants all close to each other actually has the same impact as mulch, helping to keep the things from drying out too quickly. So sun and water are the absolute most important things about growing edibles. So here is one of Juan's questions. The question is, what can be put on top of soil to help retain moisture? We just talked about that. What will you win? So he has this wonderful water efficiency kit. And what's fascinating is it fits right in with some of the things I was just talking about. You've got a water meter here right now. This is a probe that you actually put in the soil, and it will indicate how dry it is. Really handy tool. Here is a timer. This is a timer that actually goes onto your hose, and so you don't need to plug it in. Here is a rain gauge, so you can see how much rain you've been getting. A nozzle, because if you're hand watering, which is really can be very helpful for your edibles to supplement your water. And sometimes you might need to repair a hose. So you have a hose repair kit. So that's what you're going to get if you get the right answer. And you need to email those as indicated here. Something to remind you, if you don't want to be writing furiously when you see information, Ron will be sending copies of the slides, but you can also use your phone to take a picture. You can use a screenshot. So you should have a lot of options to make copies of things. So that was question number 1. Back to our regular presentation. So other things to consider when you're looking at growing anything, but particularly edibles, access. If you put them in a place that is hard to get to, or you grow them in something that is really big, you may have trouble harvesting or maintaining, trimming, so watering. So is it something you're going to have access to? Will you be having pests? Chances are you will, but Are you in an area, if you're planting near the back of your property and that you back up to open space, you're going to have a lot more pests than somebody that's putting they're putting it in pots or having it in an area that is protected from some of the pests. And pests can also be things like pets walking in, stepping on your plants, maybe using that as their litter box. So pests can come in different ways. Um, Growing edibles is a commitment in terms of time and energy. You have to, if you want to harvest the things and get what you want, you've got to spend time out there monitoring your plants. And you have to do it when the plants say you need to do it. When things are ripe, they are ripe, and you can't delay that. I actually have peaches and apples that are ripening, and I'm going to be away for a few days. I'm going to have somebody come harvest them because they're just going to drop on the ground and rot. I can't control it. And do consider there are costs to soil and fertilizer and water that go and plant material. So just keep those things in mind for both large and small spaces that you're going to grow edibles. So what are your options? So if you've got a little more space than just say a patio or a balcony, you can grow in the ground. You can create a bed just for edibles in the ground. And that has been the way traditionally edibles were grown for a long time. You see a lot more now where people are actually interspersing them in the landscape. The picture on the lower left has got some kale and other things growing in with landscape plants. So that may be an option for you. An easy thing is a raised bed. There's a raised bed picture there. You don't need as much space, and you may be able to incorporate that. And think about trellises. There's a picture of a walkway that has a trellis, and you could put grapevines, passion fruit, a lot of things you can grow like that on a trellis. Again, those are fairly large space options. If you're going to go the raised bed route, which is a really nice way to grow, you can do a raised one like that is totally raised with airspace under it, or you can actually put it on the ground. You can make them out of lots of different materials. You can buy kits, create your own. You do want depth of 6 to 12 inches, the wall height, just so you have enough soil and enough space for the roots. The reason we say 4-foot width or less is just to be able to get to the center. Most of us can't reach the things. If it's a 6-foot width, that means you got to get to the middle, that's 3 feet. The one thing that's very important, whether you're growing in the ground or in a raised bed that's on the ground, you don't want to walk on the soil that your plants are growing in. That compacts the soil, makes it harder for the roots, harder for the water and air to penetrate. So you really want to avoid walking. If you put your raised bed on the ground, very popular thing to do, just remember that you may want to deter weeds and rodents from coming up through the ground. So you might want to put what's called hardware cloth, which is a type of screening, metal screening on the ground. Some people, if you're going to plant on the grass, they put newspaper or cardboard down first to help deter the grass from growing back up. But don't forget, you must have drainage. When you water your plants, the most important thing is not to have the roots standing in water. You will kill your plants very quickly if the roots are wet all the time. So make sure you have some form of way for the water to get out. And things like drip irrigation are one of your best bets for raised bed. You can water manually with a hose, but you will have to do it very consistently. If you got a small space, be that a balcony or a wall, you've got lots of different options. You can do all kinds of different planters and containers. You can see there's a wall garden. They sell different box stores, gardening stores, online. You can buy containers to actually grow on a wall like that. Again, you have to remember you're going to have to get water to them. They're going to have sun, 6 hours of sun. So you still have to follow all those other things. You can also take those pots, what I do, and put them into your landscape so that you can grow an edible in controlled soil in the rest of your landscape. So those are some of your small options. If you decide to grow with containers, you absolutely have to have drainage hole. Please do not plant edibles in a container that has no hole in the bottom of it. The more space you give the plants, the more options you have for the kinds of plants you can grow and the sizes of them. I'm always experimenting. I try planting different things in smaller containers, and sometimes I get what I need and sometimes I don't. I do have a pot right now. There's a picture of it somewhere coming up. It's probably 12 inches in diameter by 12 inches high. I actually have a small pumpkin growing in that pot right now. So it's good, but it has enough soil for now to be able to do that. Material matters. If it's a terracotta, like one you see in the center of my picture there, that's actually one year at my yard. Terracotta that's unglazed gets warmer and loses water, transpires more quickly than glazed terracotta. Any other solid materials, so that your material does matter. Wood is a great insulator. It won't lose moisture as quickly. You will need to fertilize and water regularly because your plants are dependent on what's ever in that pot. You have to make sure they get everything they need. They cannot send their roots out somewhere else to look for sources of water and nutrients because you've got them contained. Couple of things you might want to think about. You can, I use coffee filters for the drain hole. It's not, the whole goal is not to get the water, keep the water out. But when you first plant a new pot, you don't want your soil coming out necessarily. The coffee filter will disintegrate over time, but the soil will gel in a way that it doesn't lose anymore and it still drains typically. I do use worm castings. This is one of the forms of ways of adding nutrients to your soil. Other name for worm castings, you can find them in bags to buy at garden stores. It's worm poop. These are the remains from worms. You may not have worms in your pots, so worm castings will help with give you some of the same benefits as having worms. And if you can do drip, all of mine are on drip. You may or may not be able to see all the little tubes running around. I do use drip for my containers. So soil. So we talked about the containers and we talked about location. What do you put in those containers? Or what do you do to your soil? So again, you'll notice in the upper right corner, this is specifically about larger areas. You're going to use typically shovels, hose, forks. You're going to want to dig up your soil at times and mix in compost when you're in between plantings for edibles, because most of your edibles are going to be annuals. This is different, not quite the same if you're growing some perennial trees and vines, but for most of the edibles we're looking at that are grown in one season only, you're going to want to update your soil. Compost is the material that you mix into the soil as opposed to mulch, which goes on top. And you don't ever want to mix your mulch into your soil. It always stays on top. And so you'll have to move it out of the way when you tend your soil if it has not degraded to the point where it can be incorporated. You'll want to fertilize and you'll want typically a nice smooth surface. So that's a large area. If you're growing in a small area, things are very different. I already mentioned this once before. This small pot is providing everything this plant needs. The plant has no other way of getting any other moisture or nutrients except for what you give it in the soil. So you want to use a really good potting soil. Make sure it says potting soil. One of the things potting soil has is elements, usually things called perlite or vermiculite, different things that are in there to allow drainage. Again, you want your water to be able to drain. The thing is if you're growing in a pot, you are going to deplete the nutrients at the end of that season. You're going to have an accumulation of salts. Our water is alkaline in Southern California, and those salts all end up at the bottom of your pot. Even if you have drainage, that's one of the other reasons for having drainage, is to try to get some of that to leach out. But you are going to have to replace at least 1/3 of your soil each year. I will tell you, I have the best production in the pots that I replace the entire amount of soil, or at least 2/3 of it each season. That is expensive. You do have to buy more soil. You do have to find a way to get rid of or incorporate into other areas your old soil, but it's very important. You can't keep your soil from season to season for your edibles if you're using them in pots. And you may or may not want to mulch. I mentioned before, if it's densely planted, you may not need to, but you aren't going to want to mix that mulch back in. So you're going to have to move it out of the way if you're repotting. I don't usually use mulch in my pots for my edibles. So that leads us to our next question. What should you do to potting soil for edibles each season? I just talked about that, so hopefully some of you remember. And it's the same kit that you're entering for that Juan will be giving away. So don't forget to email your answer for question number 2 to Rightscape.
Shelley, this is Juan. I'm just going to just jump
Yeah,
in really quick. So
sure.
everybody, in regards to these questions, so the more questions you answer, there's 3 questions only. That just gives you 3 opportunities to go into it's going to be a drawing. So everybody answers, so you'll be able to get 3 chances to win. So I think there's going to be a total of 6 winners. So good luck with everybody. And yeah, that's it. Thanks,
So
Shelley.
stay tuned. There's one more question. So we talked about the soil, but the plants, yes, they use photosynthesis to create the carbohydrates they need for growth, but they also need nutrients in that soil to aid them in that growth. The macronutrients, the ones that they need the most of, are the big 3, N, P, and K. And that's nitrogen. Those are the atomic symbols for these naturally occurring elements: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Potassium is a version of salt. Our soil and our water is very alkaline, so it's not as important to have a lot of potassium in your fertilizers that you acquire. If you buy a fertilizer, every single one of them will have these 3 numbers somewhere. Sometimes it's big and bold on the front of the bag or the box or the jar. Sometimes it's buried someplace. Look for it because it's important. The reason it's important is nitrogen is what plants need for their green growth, their leaves, their stems, their stalks, their trunks. Nitrogen is the key building block for plants. So especially when your plants or edibles are new, or if you're growing things that you want to eat the leaves, you want to be making sure they get plenty of nitrogen. Phosphorus is what plants need to produce their reproductive structures for flowers and fruits. And so if you are trying to get a lot of flower and fruit production, and this is true not just of your edibles, but all your plants, you want to make sure they're getting a little more of that second number, which is phosphorus. If you forget, they're in alphabetical order. If you look, even though the atomic symbol letters aren't, the words are. There are also, if you look at a number of fertilizers and soils, they'll have micronutrients in there. There are other things that are really helpful in their growth and can be added. I cannot stress more highly, follow the label instructions. If it says 1 tablespoon per gallon, 2 tablespoons per gallon is not better. Half a tablespoon per gallon isn't enough. If it says a half a cup for this area, don't double it or triple it. A couple of things happen. If your plants get too much fertilizer, it actually blocks their ability to absorb water through the soil. and that their roots won't be able to get the water, and your plants will look like they're dying of not getting any water, when reality is you've blocked their ability to absorb their nutrients. The other thing is if you give them too much growth capability too fast, they get really big. Might not be as important for your edibles, but what happens is that new green growth is also what most pests love. And so you will be attracting more pests if you have more new green growth than the plant is able to than normally have with a normal amount of nitrogen. So just beware, but this applies large and small. So how do you what kinds of fertilizers? There's really two choices out there. Synthetic just means that the natural chemicals that are I mean, NP and K are naturally occurring elements in our world. They were just taken and combined in a lab as opposed to taken from a natural source. Um, those are the ones that have the bigger numbers, that if you see 20, 20, 20 or something like that, those are synthetics. They're fast, they're inexpensive, you don't need them as much. They do have salts in them, so if you're using them on your pots, they might accumulate more. Again, another reason for replacing your soil if you've used synthetic fertilizers. If you have a lot of runoff from when you're fertilizing, water runoff, that fertilizer gets into our natural environment, our ocean, and can cause algae blooms that are harmful for our ocean. So beware, and all of our water elements, not just oceans. So natural fertilizers are slower. You're going to need to do them more often. I use a natural fertilizers, and I do it when I'm adding hand watering every couple weeks or so, depending on what plants are, what they're growing. But you you definitely want to use them though during periods they're not as effective when it's cooler out. Some people don't like the sense of them. Some of them are based on algae, and so they have a very strong aroma, which can be attractive to some forms of life and not necessarily people. So the last big thing we need to talk about is integrated pest management, or IPM. What does this mean? We'll talk first about why is it important to be identifying your pests? Because in order to be able to manage pests, you got to know what it is that you're trying to manage. If you've got snails, you're going to do something very different than you have aphids. So in order to effectively manage your pests, you absolutely got to know what it is that's damaging it. And then you need to think about, is this amount of damage keeping me from getting the harvest I need? Or is it just making my plant have little holes on the leaves? You may not need to manage pests if it's not causing a problem for what you're trying to accomplish. So give those things some thought. And then when you decide you need to do something, the whole idea with integrated pest management is you want to do the things that are least harmful or toxic first. And that means least harmful to the plants, to our environment, and to us as people, and any other living creatures. So the things that we're looking at things that are cultural, meaning like I mentioned before, don't overfeed your plants. Put them in the right place. A plant that is not getting enough sun and enough water and enough nutrients is not as healthy as one that is. Just like people, if your plants aren't as healthy, then they're more susceptible to all kinds of pest damage. So healthy plants, fewer pests. Mechanical, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of these. That means doing everything from picking off your bugs and throwing them away, squishing them, drowning them in water, whatever it is that you want to do. So it's maybe using a a container around it, screening netting to keep something from getting to them. Could be copper tape, lots of different mechanical things. Organic, that's using, you can consider organic to be that, either cultural or organic, to be that lady beetle, otherwise known as a ladybug there. That's a picture of one eating aphid eggs. They are wonderful. Organic can also include something called a spray called BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. It is a naturally occurring bacteria, which is why it's considered organic, although some people will call it a chemical. It will disrupt the life cycle of small caterpillars, and we're talking small, probably a ½ inch or under. Big tomato worms, no impact at all. You got to get them small. Some people proactively spray things they know they will have small critters crawling on with this BT. Your choice. If you feel compelled to use something that is more chemical, please read the directions. It is, these elements can be dangerous to different kinds of living creatures, including you. So please be very, very careful. And remember, whatever it is that you're using, if we're talking edibles here, you're going to be eating this. So you definitely want to be using something that you don't mind being on the item that you're going to be eating. Which is very different than when you're talking about some of your ornamentals. You might treat ornamentals in a slightly different way because you're not planning to eat them. So then some of the least toxic things you can do for IPM, again, integrated pest management: squish, squash, squirt. If I get aphids, I squirt them with water. I don't squirt them with a chemical. I don't want the chemicals as much. There are attractants you can use, this little sticky traps like this picture here. I do use those sometimes for aphids. There are things that repel them, soaps and oils. So there's a variety of things that you can do that are either naturally occurring or just making sure that you don't do things that are going to harm anything else other than the intended pest. Again, that's why I go back to intended pests. So over on the right, and Elise will put this in the chat, is a fabulous resource that will help you identify what kinds of pests you might be experiencing based on the kind of damage you're seeing on a specific plant, or based on a pest that you've identified. Tells you how to try to manage that pest. Again, I use the word manage as opposed to eliminate. It is not possible, nor is it good for our world to eliminate everything that we consider to be a pest. So we're not talking about pest elimination, it is management. Some funny little tricks. If you can't see those lovely green hornworms on your tomatoes, they hide really well. Some people have found very helpful to spray them with water, to spray your plant, and the worms will start wiggling, and they might make it a little easier for you to see. I also find if you have them in a pot someplace and you see little black droppings, right above those little black droppings is going to be what's creating those. That is worm poop or caterpillar poop, and you will find the culprit somewhere in that general vicinity. It's been said they don't seem to like cherry tomato plants. I'm not sure why, but I have heard that is true. There are soil-borne pests. If you buy tomatoes, ones that have been bred for home use, and also other use, they are actually bred to be resistant to different soil-borne diseases, which is why some people have more trouble with heirlooms than some of these others. So the things you can do is buy those that are disease resistant, and also rotating your crops. You don't want to grow, especially this just goes back to the soil in the pots. You can replace your soil. You can't replace your soil in a ground or a raised bed, so you're going to have to move you can't grow tomatoes in the same place year after year. Do keep in mind, if you are using chemicals or things that will hurt things like our bees. If we don't have pollinators, we don't get any harvest. And this is really true if you're trying to grow things like squash and cucumbers. They need to have a pollinator, a bee, a butterfly, something go from the male flowers to the female flowers, or you don't get any fruits, any squash or cucumbers, unless you want to go out with a paintbrush and actually remove the pollen from the male flowers and do the pollinating yourself. So we don't want to eliminate our pollinators. Finally, if you're going to spray chemicals, spray them in the evening. And the reason for that is there are fewer pests out in the evening that are the unintended recipients of those, like bees. If you were going to water in the morning, because then you are not going to be having as much trouble with things like mildew and fungus, because the water that you get on your plants unintendedly won't end up giving the perfect condition for those mildews and funguses to grow. So, our last question before we get into actually talking about what plants you might want to grow. So we just talked a lot about this. What do those letters IPM represent? Again, email your answer to Rightscape, and Juan will be conducting drawings for the 6 sets of these 5 items. So good luck to everybody for the giveaway. Now we're going to get into what I consider the more fun. So that was the mechanics. So what do you need to do? Where do you need to do it? How do you make it happen? What are you going to grow? There's so many choices. The first thing you have to think about is what grows when. I'm sorry, some people are able to grow tomatoes in the winter in Southern California. You won't get nearly the production. There are warm season annuals, and I call these, this is Shelley's terminology, seed containers. If you're growing something that has the seeds in or outside of it, fruits, vegetables, those are the things that are warm season annuals. You want your plant to go through its entire reproductive structure to get to the point where it's got that thing you want to eat. These are things that need lots of sun and lots of heat. If you are inland Orange County, you may have to provide a little bit of shade for some of these because you can burn your vegetables and your fruits. So this is growing. It's actually mine. This is mine. It's a small pumpkin, a sugar pumpkin, and it's now all orange. It's very fun. You can see I have it growing on a wire. Actually, this is used for construction, for concrete work. So I have got it supported so it's not rotting in the ground. So the cool season annuals are the ones we grow in Southern California in the winter most successfully, when we have a lower sun intensity and less heat. But these are the things that you want to eat: the leaves, think lettuce; the buds, think things like broccoli and cauliflower. Those are the immature versions of flowers. And that's what we eat. The roots, whether it be beets, potatoes, whatever. So those are the things that are happier in Orange County. Again, we're talking Orange County in our cooler seasons. And then if you've got perennials, these are things that grow year round. What are these? Different kinds of vines, grapevines, even strawberries, blackberries, bushes, blueberries. These are perennials. They grow year round. They don't die after they try to reproduce. They just keep on year round at their season producing fruit. And then some perennials. So you first have to think about what the season is as far as what you can grow. We're just coming to the end of when you can probably plant small warm season annuals. You may have some success. Most of you probably, it gets too hot to plant them in July and August. So how do you select them? Things you want to eat. How I select is primarily things that are fun, intriguing, pumpkin, just because it's kind of cool. I grow things that are either harder to find in the store, different varieties of squash or tomatoes that are not at my normal grocery store. So things that you might be able to find them at a farmer's market or a specialty store. So I tend to grow things like that. Again, your site, I mean, if it's a vine like a pumpkin, you got to have a lot of space. So you got to match the growing characteristics. If it gets tall or big, do you have that space? So here are some ideas. Again, these are what the things that are typically annuals. They put all their energy into one-time growth for one season's growth. Some of these cool season, again, here's a Romanesco down here. That's a version, it's a relative of like a broccoli and a cauliflower. Same family as the cabbage family. So these are the things that you might grow in our cooler season. And then the warm season, what we're growing right now, what I'm growing right now, squash, eggplants, peppers, beans. There's lots of different things that are annuals that grow now. Cucumbers. Herbs. You can grow some herbs year round, and you can grow some herbs only annually in our world. If you're in a climate where they freeze, a lot of these perennials don't work in areas where you get a freeze. The only problem with growing perennial herbs is that typically you want the new growth for your harvest for using in your cooking. And so if your plant starts to get really big and leggy, you're not going to get as much new growth. So it may be a perennial, but you may not be getting enough of what you want to harvest, and you might have to grow it regularly as opposed to growing it forever in one spot. And the annuals, those are the ones, the only different one down there is Parsley is a biennial, which what that means is its first season, it puts all its energy into leaves, which is perfect if you want to be using parsley to cook with. Its second year, it's going to start putting its energy into a flower stalk. So you might want to take it out at the end of the year, or you might want to leave it and take some early harvesting and then replant it. Vines. So if you want it, there are some vines that are annuals. And again, whenever you say vines, down in the right there, it says all vines need support. They have to be able to latch on to something. So you need to come up with a way to support them. So the annuals, you saw that I was using that metal wire for my pumpkin, which is considered a winter squash. Winter squashes are not things that are grown in the winter. It just so happens that they last longer than the summer squash, so you can actually harvest them and keep them, as you may know, for pumpkins. You could keep them for months on end. You can't keep a zucchini for months on end. Doesn't work. So that's what a winter squash is it's got more longevity off the vine, not that it grows in the winter. So perennials, there's some options. And then non-biting perennials are things like strawberries and blueberries. And finally, fruit trees. You can, even in a small space, you can grow fruit trees. There are those that are evergreens, the citrus and avocado. Remember that these are trees, and I don't know anyone yet that's really doing a good job of growing avocados in some kind of pot. They seem to really need to be in the ground. You can grow most citrus varieties. There's a number of them that you can grow in a pot very successfully. Remember, you're controlling the water, you're controlling the nutrients. You're going to have to make sure you give it everything it needs, because if it's planted in the ground, it will figure out how to get all those nutrients if it's surviving well. So espalier, this is my yard, and those are apples, and these are peaches. That's a close-up of the peaches pretty much a week or so ago. Right now, I am loaded. This is not a very big space. These are about 3-4 feet tall and covering an area of about 10-12 feet. I get a huge amount of apples and peaches and a very, very small space. Plus, I get a lot of people stopping by going, oh my goodness, are those apples? What is that? Anyway, it's great fun. So there are Deciduous meaning all of these things drop their leaves in the winter. So you can grow them, but just be prepared. A reminder, anything that's perennial is going to take care throughout its entire season every single year, especially if you want good fruit production. You're going to have to prune your fruit trees and take care of them. Citrus is the one exception. You don't really have to prune it, but all the deciduous ones do take effort. So with that, how do you get started with all of this? So to get started, you have really two choices: seeds or cuttings or transplants. Seeds and cuttings actually can end up becoming transplants if you grow the seeds outside of where their eventual growth is going to be. It's a seed packet. Your seed packets have lots of information on them. Please read it if you're going to grow by seed. I do grow a number of things by seed. Some things I start at home indoors on a grow mat for some heat early on. Some years I have more luck than others. The problem with seeds is the small plants are very attractive, even in a pot, to a lot of predators. And this is me using strawberry baskets to keep predators out of my new seedlings. Once they get their second or third set of leaves, then those early predators aren't a problem. And you know, once they get to be, like, you can see these grew from seed, and they're big enough that I don't have those early problems. Cuttings, things like perennials, like herbs, you can actually cut them. This is oregano I've cut, and I rooted it in the house in a vase of water, and then I put it in a pot, and it'll just grow to another oregano plant. So you can do that, or you go and you buy ready to transplant plants at a nursery or a garden place. And that includes small things like these lettuces or your trees that you're going to get started with. So pros and cons to both. This is easy. This costs more money. This takes more time and has more predator and early growth issues. So now that you've figured out you're growing, that all this, you're not done. Once you've got your location picked, you're watering, you're fertilizing, your soil's all good, you got your plants in there, you got to keep going. um, they may get too big. They may need staking and supporting, trimming. You've got to control them. You've got to monitor if they're showing. Like, it's really easy for me. I have tomatoes growing pots by the front of my house. If they look wilted, that means I didn't get enough water that day. And if I notice that the day that starts and I water them, they're perfectly fine. It's not as good for my tomatoes. I will tell you, the bottom of my tomatoes, when they're all brown, that's signs of too much and then too little water. That's a water inconsistency problem. So you'd rather not get to that point, but if you do, if you catch it early, you won't lose your plant. You're going to have to harvest, and this one little pot, again, it's about 12 inches in 10 12 inches in diameter. All these carrots came out of that one pot, and you can see some are really big, some are really little, but you can grow. So that was my one harvest. I harvested it all at once. What do you do with all those carrots? I ended up grating a bunch of them and freeze them so I can use in baking later on, for when I have more than I can eat. But things like young is more tender. I like to do harvest my squash when they're little. I'll tell you, it is amazing. I'll see a squash that's a few inches big one day, and if I don't harvest it that day, the next day it's a lot bigger. It happens really quickly. Things you can do, you can also, for greens like lettuces and parsley and others, just take the outer edges and the plant will keep producing in the center. But you have to keep doing that. So some other things you might want to think about if you're going to continue to do this on a regular basis: keeping a diary or a calendar. That's my notes there. When things have matured, what I did, and partly so that When things are really successful, I can go back and see what I did. When things are really not successful, I can also see what I did. So you might want to take notes in some way, whether it's manually on a computer. No, don't plant more than you can use unless you have a good way to get rid of it. It is, I know people, including myself, that it's just fun, but if you're not going to eat it and you end up throwing it out, is it worth it to you? You decide. I'm guilty of not always labeling, or a lot of times the labels get just, if I try to use labeling, I forget what it was that I planted. Once it's grown, I know what most things look like, but which variety of radish, I don't know. So it is helpful. Encouraging beneficial partners means let the birds come and help you. Let spiders are wonderful. I know people don't like spiders, but spiders are only there to try to trap other bugs in your yard. So let them help you. So anyway, do a lot of good things. It's okay to fail. Don't forget. I mean, I have plants die. I've learned that I can't put things in certain places. It's okay. I harvest fruit that has a damaged area to it. That's okay, because I know the rest of it's good and I know how I grew it. So it's okay to not have everything perfect. Believe the labels. If it says it's going to grow 10 feet long or going to get 7 feet high, don't say, oh, I'm gonna keep it little. It's not, it isn't gonna work very well. If it says that, please, you'll be most successful if you adapt to what the plant needs as opposed to trying to make the plant adapt to your needs. Doesn't work very well. But then share your success. That was one of my harvest one days, and those purple things in there, those were purple tomatoes. Very cute. They're pretty on the thing. I like to grow things that are unique and pretty. So with that, if you've got questions and things after the fact, hopefully you've gotten a lot of information from Elise as we've gone, and we're going to have an open Q&A coming up here. But where do you go? And Elise can put some of this in the chat for you. Master Gardeners does have a website. We talked about the IPM website that's actually from the UCANR, but this is the Orange County Master Gardeners. We also have a hotline, and you can actually send questions to that hotline. Be prepared though. If you just say, what's the problem with my plant? It's like going to the doctor. This plant looks bad. Well, what plant is it? Where is it growing? The more details and photos you can provide with your question, the better an answer you're going to get. So we have master gardeners that not only their knowledge, but they have access to a lot of other resources to help you try to get the answers to your questions. And then from IRWD, there's their website, and the Rightscape, which will help you find the right plants to grow in your environment. So keep that all in mind. And again, you can take a picture of this or get this from the handouts you're going to get. And that is the end of the formal presentation. I can see that there's a master gardener, Greg, who's helping to answer questions, which is great. Also, he's very helpful. So we're going to end this with questions, and you can see a quote from Graham Kerr, a known chef. I get a lot of benefit out of gardening. It's not all just for the eating part. It really is for the enjoyment, the challenge. It's got good stuff. So with that, I am going to quit sharing my screen, and we will go to a Q&A.
So Shelley, there were probably 1,000 questions. So I don't think we can possibly answer all of them. And I have posted several times the link to the Master Gardener website, or hotline rather. And I also told them, as you said, that to attach a picture to that, because that will be very helpful to the people who are trying to diagnose their issue. But I do want to go to a couple of questions.
Oh, good.
The first question was from Bruce, so he gets his asked. He's commented that the developer compacted the soil. How deep should he dig down to replace that soil?
You know, if you think about it, I'm going to use the example of a raised bed. So a raised bed, you want a good 12 inches ideally for soil, but you also need drainage. So you probably need to dig down beyond the 12 inches just so that and amend some of that below so that there's drainage, and then put in. So I don't have an exact number, but that's probably anywhere from 12 to 24 inches is going to give you your best results. It's really hard if you the other option, which people spend years, and you can do that, is continually amending your soil, adding nutrients and composting to your soil over a period of time to try to help improve its ability. The other thing is, rather than do that, you might want to just put a raised bed on top of those areas, and then you don't have to deal with your bad soil or pots or something like that, because that's what a lot of people are doing when you've got something bad to do for your native soil. Because it's true, I had terrible soil, and I did have about 24 inches replaced in my bed when I had my landscaping redone. Fortunately, I only have about 90 square feet, so planting area, so it wasn't too bad.
There were also quite a few questions related to citrus pests, changing of colors in the leaves. So I also posted a link up to citrus, so they could follow that link or use the hotline. Some people asked about squirrels, and I posted an IPM pest note on squirrels.
Just a comment in general, any mammal pests, whether it be gophers, squirrels, rats, raccoons, those kinds of pests are the most challenging of all. You either have to resort to some form of trapping or containment, meaning you put you have a greenhouse or you have a wire or mesh container, some way to keep them out. So you either keep them out by preventing their access, or you have to trap them. Those are really, you can go see the IPM notes, but there's no way to totally get rid of that kind of a pest in your yard. I wish.
And I just want to add on traps. Some people, in their effort to be kind, live trap, but it is illegal to live trap and then relocate mammals in the state of California. So if you're going to live trap, you have to be willing to dispatch them. Or read the IPM notes and see what you can do. I have a dog who chases off squirrels and things like that. So you just be aware.
Yeah, and I did see another comment. It is true. If you keep your area clean so there isn't rotting fruit, you keep your if you've got compost piles, you keep it secured. So if you don't make your area as attractive to these pests, they will go someplace else. At least you could at least deter them. It won't stop them, but they might be looking elsewhere.
There was also some questions on mulch, what specifically to use, and especially if you're in a fire area, what kind of mulch?
Well, if you're growing edibles, you have to use what we call an organic mulch, which is some kind of a wood straw product. If you have green plants growing, and I'm not an expert on the fire issue, but I don't think that wood chips are going to be a huge fire issue if it's in an area that you are regularly irrigating. But I honestly don't know if somebody else knows more about that. I've never encountered that question about fire and wood chips. that's what most people will use. And if you're growing edibles, it's usually non-colored wood products. And just so that they aren't leaching that color back into the soil as they get watered. It's your choice. The things like rocks and other hard things that you might want to. The problem with rocks is they're great for plants that like their soil to dry out. Think succulents, cactus. And so they're not as good. They may be better at fire prevention, but they're not necessarily as good for your edible garden.
So I live in a fire-prone area, and my homeowner's insurance sends a fire inspector out every year. And I had gotten lovely leaf mulch from the tree trimmers, and he told me that was fine in my beds that were away from my house, but it needed to be 5 feet away from my house. So it should be fine around your trees or in your vegetable beds, just not up close to the house.
Good, thank you.
Let's see.
You guys, just a quick reminder. Make sure to email the answers to rightscape@irwd.com. We're going to be collecting all the, you can just send one email with all 3 questions answered, and that'll show you 3 chances to win. And we're going to stick all those names into our drawing little program that we have, and it'll spit out the 6 winners. So good luck, everybody.
You know, one last question if we have time, because I know
Sure.
Greg's on and he was my savior on answering these questions, because we usually have 2 co-hosts and there was only one today.
Yeah.
And so it was like I couldn't even read fast enough. So thank you, Greg. But one of the questions was they had a citrus tree that the scion, the graft part, died and the rootstock is doing wonderful. And is it possible to graft? And I'm thinking, Greg, do you not know about grafting? Can he be unmuted?
I can also say, I mean, basically you could, if you have the capabilities of grafting, anybody can graft onto rootstock if the rootstock is healthy. But I have never grafted and I probably won't, but that's definitely what you want, is healthy rootstock. And then you would need to get a scion that to be able to do it properly. You'd need to get the cutting from your desired plant that is compatible with that rootstock. And I don't know, it depends on, I mean, it's not like you can put a peach on a citrus, like, you know, so it would have to be the same variety, the same type of.
And you know, as we're discussing here, it just came into my mind that UC Riverside has a citrus research center, and they would probably be a good source of information on that, and possibly even of scion wood, because we do have to be careful right now with citrus because of the Longbing disease and the Asian citrus psyllid. So you wouldn't want to just cut a piece of wood off of somebody else's tree. You need to get it from an approved source.
Elise and Shelley, can I jump in there? Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Yes, we
Please
can.
do, Greg.
Yeah,
yes,
hi, this is Greg
Rager.
I'm not sure how much time we have, but I thought it might be easier just to answer some of these questions verbally. First of all, and I did put some of that information in the chat. I can't seem to download it, but I have an Asian citrus psyllid information sheet that I could give to you, and you could send on to them. But please, folks, do not transfer any citrus or take cuttings from a citrus from anybody and move them anywhere. There is a really bad bug. It's Longbing. I think it's technically a bacteria. I keep saying virus because that's what they thought it was originally. And that's a very bad thing. It's called the greening disease. It's destroyed much of the citrus in Florida and in Texas, and it is here, and we don't want it to get any worse. As to grafting, yes, as long as your rootstock is there, the best place currently, the Master Gardener Group, to the best of my knowledge, does not have any grafting workshops. However, There is California Rare Fruit Growers, which I'm a former member of, where you can learn how to propagate a lot of your fruiting plants, which is my area of somewhat expertise. There is also the Food and Farm Lab in the Great Park in Irvine, and they have a lot of workshops there that many of the master gardeners support, and so that might be something they could be offering in the future. There was also a question about how can you save the chat. I personally couldn't see anything to download the chat. However, if you go in there, put your cursor in there. If you're on a PC, Control A, Control C to copy it, and then paste it into a word processing program. You Mac users, you're on your own for that. And once again, if you have fruit trees, the question comes up with pots. Make sure they're massive pots. They won't do very well unless the pot is huge. The problem with having a huge pot of anywhere between 25 and 50 gallons is you still have to do root prunes, and those become unmanageable to try to get the plant out of the pot to do a root prune. So just be careful with that.
And Greg, to add to that, the issue, if you've got a big pot, it's also weighs a lot. So not only for moving it, but if you've got it like on a balcony or something,
Yes.
you suddenly are going to have hundreds of pounds, particularly
Yes.
when you have it watered. So you need to make sure that you are not violating any structural capacity of wherever it is sitting. They
Yes.
do weigh a lot.
Absolutely. And the thing I like about a half wine barrel, a real one, not a plastic one, the thing I like about a half wine barrel, and that's perfect for figs, kumquats. Somebody asked about a Buddha's hand. Yeah, sure. But the advantage of having those is about the time that wine barrel disintegrates is when you need to do a root prune anyway. And that kind of helps solve the problem of getting it out of the barrel. One question that just came in about cutting from an Italian prune tree. Yes, prune could be grafted to a plum tree. They're both stone fruit, and you shouldn't have any problems with that.
Again, and as long as the growing characteristics, it needs the kind of environment that grows where you are. I mean, some things are again, you got to provide whatever that fruit tree likes, because some things like more sun or more humidity, and you just, so it's not like you can just put anything on a rootstock and it'll be happy. Here.
Is root pruning just for potted trees? Well, sure. Root pruning, yeah, that's for your potted plants. We're talking now about potted trees, yes. Typically, your normal question came up about watermelon in a pot, sure. But once again, make sure it's a big enough pot, it has enough soil in there. I probably would not put anything other than maybe herbs in anything smaller than what we call a number 5 potted plant. Talk about blueberry in a pot. Yeah, there's no blueberries. Yeah, the box tree. Yeah, the wine barrels. I'm looking for a source too. I live out in Temecula, and I'm haunting the wineries to see if I can get some. But yeah, I like the real wine barrels. Blueberries like acidic soil, an azalea mix, sand, and peat moss is great for that. There's a variety of different websites, and I know we're not supposed to recommend any. However, if you went to the Dave Wilson Nursery website, you'll find they have a lot of information that talks about blueberries and what does good in a Southern California area, which is what our concern is here. Mangoes, yeah, they can grow in Orange County, but they're a little bit more on the temperamental side. And yes, anything that you plant that's a tree, you got to be careful that it doesn't get too big or it may create havoc with that. I will take, I'm sorry, Shelley, I'm going to take exception with one thing you may mention about
sure.
not pruning citrus. I believe what you meant is they don't need as much pruning, but you
Right.
do need to prune the dead, the dying, and
Oh,
control the height of all of your trees. And if you all ever catch me at the South Coast Research Station, which is another link that I put into the website, um, that is, I try to keep our fruit trees less than 6 to 8 feet or so, because that's about as high as I can reach without a ladder. And you do have to manage those starting out when they're young. It's very difficult to take a tree that's 40 feet tall and cut it back down to 6 or 8 feet.
no,
A number 5 pot it used to be called a 5-gallon pot, but somebody with way too much free time said that doesn't really hold 5 gallons. And so now they just reference it as a number 5, but it's the same size pot. What else
no,
did I
Greg, you're
miss?
absolutely right. You're right on the citrus. I was just meaning you don't need to prune citrus for production, but you do need
I
to
know
as much. You need to,
as
you
much.
really need to, you need to prune your citrus to keep it to a size that's manageable and to keep it healthy.
Right. And
Exactly.
Isabel would hurt both of us.
Yeah.
Shelley and Greg, would you like to say 20 words on chill hours?
Well,
Yeah, I'll go. You want to
go
take it?
ahead. No, go ahead.
Chill hours is basically the number of hours that you have, and depending upon which gauge you want to use, in theory, it's below freezing. Some people use 40 degrees, some people use 45 degrees. Chill hours, bottom line is, if you have a plant that likes to grow in Minnesota where they have snow, they're probably not going to like it down here in Southern California. There is we typically have somewhere between 100 to maybe 200 chill hours in the Orange County area. But once again, this is going to depend upon your area. Out here in Temecula, we get colder, but we also get hotter. And some of those hot days will make up for those chill hours. So just do a quick search on the internet and it'll to find out what your USDA growing area is. Dave Wilson Nursery, yes, it was Dave Wilson Nursery. Don't tell them I told you because they don't like us talking about people. That being said, Tom Spellman from Dave Wilson Nursery is very supportive of a lot of the efforts going on at the South Coast Research Station in Irvine. And that is where they will have workshops. Once we get through COVID, they have a lot of community outreach programs there, and that will help answer a lot of the questions that you all have right now. We're just kind of dealing with some issues with with COVID. Yes, olive trees in Irvine should be fine. Prune fruit trees usually depend. Your normal stone fruit, you're talking about January, February. Tropical is usually March or April.
And then there's thinning for, I mean, there's pruning for fruit trees, deciduous, and then there's thinning once you start to have fruit so that the
Yes.
plant can produce large enough size fruits that you want as opposed to lots of little ones. So there's each deciduous fruit tree has different needs in terms of pruning, and you ought to go do the research on each one individually.
Yeah, persimmons don't do well in pots. Put it in the ground. Yeah, yeah. Persimmon trees, persimmons, avocados, those don't do well. You need something. And by the way, they have what they call dwarfing or semi-dwarfing rootstock. That doesn't mean that the tree's only going to grow 4 or 5 feet. What that means, it's only going to grow 15 to 18 feet, not the 25 to 30 feet. And I see people laughing because they've probably been there. So it is a little tricky, and trying to maintain your tree at the right height from the very beginning is very difficult. And I would recommend, once again, you check with places like the Food and Farm Lab in the Great Park in Irvine, future events at the South Coast Research Station, where they may be talking about some of those things in the future. Also, the California Rare Fruit Growers is a place where you can find where to find trees that will grow in your specific area. Because even though we're all in Southern California has a tremendous number of macroclimates where you've got different capabilities. Vista, as an example, can grow a lot of tropicals. If you're close to the beach, you can do some things that you can't do further inland. So just keep that in mind. And if you are getting a fruit tree, make sure that it's something that is designed for the Southern California area. And I'm sure we're running out of time now.
Yeah, I see a question on why, about nursery selling plants that are end of season. I mean, the reality is if you've got a greenhouse, you can plant things anytime you want. All of the stores out here are in business to sell you plants, and they are happy to stock and sell plants whenever they think people want to buy them. And it isn't necessarily true that they will only offer what will grow at that time, because there are people that have different growing environments, but you can't guarantee that, especially for vegetables, for annuals, that you will get exactly what will grow in that season. If they've got them left over to sell, they'll be selling them.
Yeah, real quickly, there's a couple questions that came in about persimmons. There's no such thing as a semi-dwarf persimmon. You've just got to maintain it. Expect your persimmon tree to under the best environment to probably still grow to 10 or 12 feet or so. If you have persimmons in 2018 and then nothing after that, usually the question we ask is, have you been fertilizing it? Because typically when you fertilize it, you're generally not fertilizing it for this year, you're fertilizing it for next year. And some trees and some varieties of fruit trees do what we call alternate bearing, because the tree will produce a great number of fruits one year and it's now exhausted itself. And the next year it says, I can't do that. And you then get a small amount of fruit. How do you control that? You could sometimes control alternate bearing by pruning the tree down to a manageable level, and what they call thinning the fruit, which is what Shelley mentioned. And by thinning the fruit, you are once again telling the tree, don't try to mature all of these little babies, and it will then do better with that. Your blueberries, if I have about 10 of them outside the front door of our house here, they are in what we call number 15, or the 15-gallon pots. And I have 3 varieties in each pot, and they do very well. You want to have them cross-pollinating each other. Don't just buy one blueberry. And once again, use a azalea mix, peat moss, and sand. Blueberries. Yeah, blueberries are in pots. Leave them in pots. You don't have to worry about gophers, which we have out here, ground squirrels. And another reason to keep your tree small, a lot of you have been lamenting that you have rats and birds and everybody that you're feeding. If you have a tree that's 30 feet, a fruit tree that's 30 feet tall, 20 feet of that is feeding the population. So by keeping it down to 6 to 8 feet, it's very easy to create a structure with PVC pipe and some sort of netting over it, and you should go from there. And I'll shut up.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you so much, Greg. That was amazing. Okay, so you guys, we
Can
have
I
a couple minutes
can I
left.
just
Please,
yeah,
go ahead.
can I just add, I see it's really hard for us to answer any specific questions. Like I see when my fruit tree produces flowers but no fruits, it's very independent what kind of tree it is and what it's where it's been. So that's the kind of thing that you can take a picture of it and send it to the hotline for master gardeners, and you'll get more specific information, because it's not possible to give every possibility to why you're not getting fruit. So,
Well,
all right.
all right, everybody. Thank you so much, Shelley.
Thank you, Elise and
Elise,
Greg, for
oh.
helping. I much appreciate it.
Yes, Greg, thank you. You saved me.
I'm
Well,
glad to help. I just I couldn't get in and without being able to download anything. As you guys know, I usually sit and just download a bunch of stuff in there. So,
Yeah,
but
and Greg, you mentioned a handout or something. If you have any
Yeah.
materials, go ahead and email them to Shelley or Elise, and they'll get them over to me because I'm going to be emailing everybody. Of course, the slides, all the handouts, and then the information. This is being recorded, so it will be on our website hopefully within a couple of days. And on our website on Rightscape now, well, it's actually our website is rightscape.com. You can go on rightscape.com on our events and classes link. There's a link towards the bottom that takes you to our Vimeo page where you'll find a lot of different workshops that we've had throughout the year. I know there's some workshops that Master Gardeners have done in the past. There is the old edible gardening workshop that's going to be there just for a bit more. Once we get this uploaded, we're just going to replace it with this new one. So just go on there, and hopefully there'll be some other great videos and workshops you can take a look at.
have you got a couple minutes when we're done?
Yes.
Okay, I need to probably touch bases with you on something.
Okay.
So I'll hang.
Okay. Well, everybody, thank you so much
Thank you.
once again, and hopefully you can join us in the future for future workshops. Once again, big round of applause. Fantastic
Thanks.
presentation.
Thanks, and
Shelley.
thanks to everybody. It was great to have the assistance. So yes. All right. Take care,
Okay.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.